And now we're going to turn to one of America's biggest divorce settlements of all time. Oklahoma oil man's ex-wife has deposited a $974.8 million check from her husband, who is worth billions many times over. It is not what she wanted, but the question was, and is, was it a fair settlement? Harold and Sue Ann Hamm, from beaming on the red carpet to battling in divorce court. When their marriage fell apart, a judge ordered him to pay her nearly $1 billion. In an interview with Bloomberg, he sounded relieved.
The trial's over and feel like a free man.
And you really had no prenup?
No.
But Sue Ann Hamm went back to court saying she deserved even more money. And here's why. Under the current deal, she gets $995 million. That makes her wealthier than Taylor Swift, LeBron James, Leonardo DiCaprio. Not bad, but her ex will still be much richer. He's number 36 in the Forbes list of richest Americans. His net worth? $12.9 billion. Sue Ann says she deserves a bigger slice of that pie. After all, they were married for more than 25 years. She even worked for his oil company as a lawyer the whole time, his net worth ballooning. And now I want to welcome in attorney Ira Gar to the program. Ira represented Ivana Trump as well as Rupert Murdoch in divorce proceedings, and he has also represented federal judge Kimball Wood in that famous case as well as many more clients that we have time to mention. So, Ira, you've been on both sides as it relates to this, from the aggrieved spouse, if you will, to also the magnate or the tycoon, whatever the case may be. First off, which is harder to represent?
It's usually harder to represent the non-moneyed spouse.
Yes, really. Even though they probably have to. Well, you've heard her argument, which is, okay, $1 billion might be a lot of money here, but I was with this guy from jump. For 25 years we were together, and I was there for the appreciation of the assets that accrued since we were married. If he's worth $13 billion, I should get half of that. And I was an attorney, by the way, at the firm. I'll give the audience his clever argument that came after the fact. But where does the line start and stop in terms of, yes, you were married, but how much of a role does the spouse have in what piece of the total asset at the end of the day?
Well, first of all, as I think in this case, it depends whether the asset was marital or separate. From what I understand from reading in Forbes, he had the company before the marriage, so the issue was the appreciation of the company. And there's two types of appreciation. One is passive, which is just market forces, and the second is active, that the person did something affirmatively to make the business more valuable. I believe his argument, or his attorneys argued, was mostly passive. It was market forces. Quite frankly, from what I read about him, it seems ridiculous. He was the one who came up with the idea of horizontal drilling and fractured structures. And I don't know, if you read Forbes in, I think it was April and May, they say he's an innovator. Well, so it's hard for me to believe that it's simply
so the audience
passive.
can appreciate this. It's very rarely you'll see a CEO go, hey, I was just along for the ride. You know, the price of oil goes up, I do good, and it goes down, I kind of ride it out. I was just, good, right place, right time, and that's how I got the $13 billion.
Yeah, but Ira, if he's an innovator, isn't the wife and the support she gives at home and the work she does in the company partially responsible for his innovations by, buttressing his brain power and ideas?
Sure. I mean, one of the arguments would be made is that if she's taking care of the home, she permitted him the time to do what he needed to do. That's what in New York courts they refer to as like an economic partnership. Now, I don't really think it's generally 50-50. The cases seem to be coming down maybe on a hard asset like a house or bank account, 50-50, but maybe she might get 20% of the appreciation of the business or 15%. But
how does that number get decided, Eric? Because that would be my next question. There's this popular belief out there, well, there goes half. But how as it relates to, again, not the home and not the other hard assets, but in terms of somebody starts a business either before or with the wife, and then throughout, or the husband, whatever the case may be, and then throughout the duration of the marriage, it increases in value. How do they figure out 15, 20, 25, 50? How does that mathematics work?
If I told you they flipped a coin, you wouldn't be happy.
Well, Ira, let me ask you this. The price of oil has now gone down by 50%.
Correct.
And it's very possible that his oil business...
Oh, it did. It did.
Right.
So, in fact, I'm very upset about this because I have his stock, and my stockbroker called me recently and said...
conflicted out of the case. That's
I guess I have. No, but that particular stock, I was complaining about the brokerage account, and he said, he said, hey, Mr. Ham, his stock tanked. So at the time of the trial, he probably did well. Right now, I mean, he still did well, but I think he's down several $billions.
So here's the question. I mean, that's got to be part of it. He keeps the business, and the business may be valued, let's say, at X $billion at that time, but he's also taking the risk that oil is going to go down by 70%, and she would have wound up with that billion representing a far bigger percentage of what he ultimately has.
Correct. Generally, the way it works in New York, and it probably worked the same way in Oklahoma, is an active asset, one that you are working on, is valued at the date of the commencement of the action, so that the spouse doesn't either get the benefit of the uptick if the guy does something well, let's say the matrimonial is pending for 2 years, but she doesn't get the downtick if the market falls apart.
All I know is I'll take $1 billion. I don't care what it's
To that end, though, no, but to that end, how much do you find when you're sitting down with your client, whoever it may be, and say, okay, they're offering X. Now, $1 billion is $1 billion. I don't care, how much, the cost of living has gone up here. How much of it's business and how much of it's personal, where it is, you know what, I don't care if it's $1 billion. I want this guy to pay because after 25 years, I don't deserve to be treated the way X.
You got it. It's ego and it's personal. I mean, I recall having a woman come into my office, and I usually always ask the question at the end of my first interview, if you're in utopia, but it's a reasonable utopia, what do you want? And let's say the husband in this case was worth $100 million. And she said, well, I want half. And I said, let me ask you a question. If I could get you $25 million tomorrow, would you take it? And she said, no. And I'm thinking to myself, you'll spend 3 years litigating, you'll spend millions of dollars in fees. Why would anybody not take $25 million? But I understood she didn't hire me because she didn't like my presentation, and I understood the case went on for years and years and years.
But in this case, she actually worked there. They're married 25 years. We don't necessarily know what her role in the company was because she's working there as an attorney. If she didn't work there at all and she was married less than 25 years, she's married 5 years, there could be an argument she should be entitled to $1 billion. Isn't there a possibility?
Correct, absolutely, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's almost, I hate to say it, it's an arbitrary, it's a discretionary thing. The judge takes a look. Maybe in this case, the judge said $1 billion's enough.
So what's the legal mechanism for her to get back in there? Didn't she sign off on the $1 billion?
Well, she cashed the check, but I don't know that that's considered a ratification after there's a decision. I'm sure she has an appellate right.
She didn't agree to it? There was a decision?
I think there was a
trial.
There's a trial.
Can I ask you a question? Is there a number, though, where they say enough is enough? It's his business, he built the business, she is the wife, and you don't get $1 billion is enough?
Well, that's what they may be saying, but I tell you, in one of the very early equitable distribution cases in New York, I forget the man's name, I think it was Congress Talcott Factors. They built an $80 million business, and the wife gave him, they were married 41 years, and the wife gave him haircuts, et cetera, and the judge in that case was impressed with the wife and gave her 50%. It was very unusual at that time.
It's a good haircut. And the haircut is a double entendre in that.
He did get a haircut.
On that note, before Mark gets us in more trouble, we will head down after the break to Alabama. That's where judges disobeying orders from the highest court in the land, U.S. Supreme Court. They're listening to an Alabama Chief Justice who's actually telling them not to sign off on same-sex marriages, orders from above be damned. Could there be ramifications or repercussions for the judge? And did we get a little bit of a hint? And we'll talk to the barrister who has appeared before the high court here as to whether or not the U.S. Supreme Court is tipping their hand where they may rule on a future case about whether or not same-sex marriage should be the law of the land.